It's a place we all go through, a space between maturation and childhood. People get trapped there. They look around at the crowded hollow and think they made it, hunker down, learn the ropes, live in the middle age of high school. Some supersede it. Some are past it before they get there. And for others, the sheer volume is too much. Overtaken, understated, underrated, overplayed. Check on the mates of your adult children. They might be in there. The need to get out more. I say this in light of the collective mentality as of late, right? I say this because of societal change. I say this because it pains me too much to look back. That old salty gets more bitter with stage. I'm not acting on impulse. I'm not thirsty for the sweetness of past elixirs. Let them go by. It feels like the exchange of drink for breath, the learning that forced the level to up, empty spaces slowly filling. Swimming's hard for walkers. Listening is difficult for talkers. It wasn't really that big of a deal. We felt like it was, but no one even knew who we were. No one cared. That's what bound us. The clear and very present rejection of and from the outside world. People who listened to pop music and drank soda. Places that had a team for every fan and a familiar sign to dine on. Something could be found everywhere. We were the outside looking in. We were the thoughts provoked by the pushes and slamming. The ground and doors were hard shut before us, locked and chelated, but not frozen. We were going to figure this out. We were going to make a difference. They would write our names on history and call equations after us. We would find the center of the universe and define it, graph it, chart the progress, predict the end. They forced their hands, not mine. I'm not an easy push. I'm not falling by the shove. Protect the reject, though I did feel the initial heat, crash and burn. The have-nots for scarce spots ordered to get out of here. Please note your exits. The closest one might be behind you. It's okay if you don't get it. I didn't get it either, but man, did we try. We did wind up with something else. See, even though I left, most of those guys are still there. They're core, super core. Core enough to hurt us back. Like the fireball in childhood cartoons, the unicorns were forced into the sea. The spirit of many a kin are still down there, breathing through magic. I have to remember to breathe. There was a circle, and I followed it around and around and kept having to skip in the same spots every time. It became a test of rhythm and will. I'd switch between the layers and their spots would change. Like a cheetah turned cephalopod, the colors became the background as everything disappeared. A quick sprint to the bottom. A pond too large for such a small wish. It was me. I disappeared. 1 out of 600 times you'll see me, and 1 in 6 times I'll see you. Just pretend that you saw me, okay? Pretend you welcomed it. Pretend you welcomed me. Pretend you can see me. That thing I saw that one time. That thing we saw when we were a we, and we saw things together as if we were a whole. I traced that map he drew me. I traced it 1,000 times. Found all the lux in the clavis. Found all the sight in the lines. Drew another marking and fattened up my notes. This might not mean something for a while, and until then, the rejection holds. That sentiment runs deep, rooted, interlocked. Sometimes it just comes out. Oh, go with me on this, okay? We'll evaluate some experiences that crossed lines, boundaries, turning points, intersections, crux versus crutch, to see the who's and whens, because curiosity is a strange cat that gets me every time. It was hard to watch the whole movie. I would have turned it off if Eric hadn't been there and had been the one who suggested watching it. It put me in a weird mood. It wasn't his fault, but it made me not want to be touched. I was uncomfortable sitting that close. Can he feel me tense up? Can he feel me recoil? God, why are we watching this movie? He invited me to his house afterwards. I declined, blamed it on my incessant bleeding. Valid, right? I apologized later, and he said it was okay, but that didn't relieve that feeling of that finger on my triggers. I keep having this sinking feeling like my dad's dying. I mean, I know he's got to be. I haven't spoken to him in almost 4 years, but that old bastard's not well. And the next day, I woke up in the late morning sun. The sky was a deep blue. It felt almost mocking, like an invitation that looked warm and enticing. It's been so long since the sun's been out, but the temperature didn't match the shine. 'Twas cold, not a bitter run, but still February disguised as March. I just wanted to go back to sleep. Can't I just sleep until surgery? Can't I just sleep till a publisher calls? Can't I just dream until the angst subsides? Who really gives a shit anyway? A couple of years ago, I wrote this book. Not my best writing, but some of the deepest work I've done in research and imagination. I wanted it to be more thorough. I wanted to do some experiments. I wanted it to be the truth. I was part of a growing community that at one point, but have been ostracized since I dared to question their beloved theory. But isn't that what we're supposed to do with theories? Test them? This movie is testing me. The movie was about a shut-in who was near death. He kept reading this essay over and over to hear the voice of his estranged daughter. She hated him, even as he loved her. He forgave her everything because he couldn't forgive himself, even though she didn't deserve it. He didn't deserve hers either. The writing, the shut-in, the triggers, the daughter, the stupid incessant bleeding. What a mess. I thought transferring focus could shift the paranoia, so I put on a movie about a government security agency who turned in the feds for surveying the public unimpeded. I don't think it helped. Now I'm remembering London, Eugene, the helicopters. No wonder everybody thinks I'm nuts. What it did do was bring to mind the patterns caused by interference of the bitter. Sometimes others, sometimes my own. Sometimes I'm the shut-in. Sometimes I'm the beloved theory. Sometimes I'm the rank that can't seem to elevate my status. What is this really about? Do I really care about the thing? Or do I care that I got left out? Am I a victim because I suffered harassment? Or am I a traitor because I told him to fuck off? Where's the vengeance just in this scenario? Soured more than bittered, I'd say. The movie with Eric was so disturbing because, yes, I could be the shut-in. Could be my dad. Could be the others on their keyboards in places and states and countries and basements and cellars and back offices of large entities that demand full, complete coverage of my ass and yours. The isolation of anyone and anything too big to get out the door or down the stairs. Anyone or anything beaten by their own demons into submission, or whose demons would allow themselves to be beat by submittance. The guy in the other movie who exposed the government's tactics was harassed by his conscience. He couldn't shoulder the weight of the angels and grasshoppers, and his angst felt better than that of the shut-in. The gravity of the burdens both crushing. The guy's legs crumbled in the beginning, and it was a strange contrast to the strength of his character. And conversely, the shut-in's was loaded with his regret, his body cumbersome. As weak as his will was, his legs held. Where's the ballast for such extremities? Where's the ground for who's in charge? Is there a purpose behind any of it? The guy's a real person. He's still in hiding. The shut-in's a character who dies at the end every time. But you can watch it again whenever you want. Both betrayed their loved ones by their life's choices. Which am I doing in all this shit? Am I submitting to the demons when I continue to submit for publication? Am I carrying the angels when I refuse to give up? Is this hubris? Foolishness? Honorable? A waste. Does the work reflect the need of humanity, or is it a reflection of a missing piece of me? Does every crisis have to be existential? Is this a crisis? I think I'd be less averse to it if there had been less aggression. The smear campaigns, the hacking, the stalking. Eric said I am still thinking about it, and they probably only thought about it for a minute. And I guarantee you that assessment is wrong. Of course they think about it. They go to a lot of trouble to fuck me up. It hurts, and I can't let go of it because I loved them. And even after all their bullshit, I didn't retaliate. And so now here we are, years later, and they're still fucking with me. They're definitely still thinking about it. About me. It's about betrayal. It's probably why I kept breaking up with Eric. The betrayal, not the movie. He lied to me. They all lie. Everybody lies. Lovely, okay. But what are they lying about? And why are they doing it? Are they lying to save face? Spare feelings? Hide? Are they doing it to keep trouble at bay? Are they doing it because they're cowards? Fucking cowards, all of them. Greed drives it. Fear too. I'm terrified of cowards. They'll sink themselves low and you in their suck. So afraid of their truth, they'll destroy any bit of trust and honor left in the naive. Better buck up, buttercup. Shit gets real here. This is the world on the world's terms. And if you can't handle it, you might want to wind up a shut-in. If you talk about it too loudly, you might wind up hiding behind enemy lines because they're the only ones that'll have you. The lying is symptomatic. It's there to hide the real offense. The knives we don't see that they won't admit to plunging. All that behind your back bullshit. Like Caesar, they toss you in the dressings of word salad. Gaslights parade through the town wielding an angry mob of villagers who are coming for you. It's okay. I'll wait. They'll be here any minute. Them fucking cowards. The scars don't leave. The shut-ins grew and calcified. Couch-locked and cocked to shoot down any mention of betterment, he grew into his despair. And it was allowed and enabled because others knew he was carrying their grief for him. So why stop him? Why help him? Up, out, through? They just kept feeding him, waiting for him to succumb to the load that was crushing them all, hoping that when he finally went, he'd take the guilt with him. Even if the topic is different, even if the circumstances varied, even if the motive has changed, a lie is a lie and they feel the same. Some just feel more that way than others. The guy who told on the government knew this. He knew that if a lie that big by an entity that huge could betray us all without account, then there was no hope left for honor and people, and he was determined that he would be that remnant of hope for the rest to cling. And yet, it was still a betrayal. He had made an oath, a promise, and he had broken it. And he had gagged on the orders and spewed the truth to the masses that might ignite their incandescence and better read their own rooms. I gotta be honest, in my life, many lies have left me broke in. I could smell them like cat piss on the carpet. Acrid, lingering. Doesn't matter what the truth is really at that point. Now what matters is distrust. Now what matters is misgiving. Now what matters is doubt. That's what's left. I get it. I understand why. I'm empathetic and reasonable. I see the danger in the truth, the way it gets into the cracks and expands them, the way it trickles down from the top and drips into the hole till the container is full, drowning things that breathe deceit. The shut-in housed the lies that someone told that killed someone he loved, and the truths that they couldn't face alone or together. The guy released the lies that housed the intimate truths of each and every one of us, and we wave to the excommunicated. We pretend we're grateful. We pretend something changed. I face the truth that the back of me is tougher than the front. Say it to my face. Tell me your truth. Tell me you'd rather be anywhere but here. Tell me you don't really love them. Tell me you're okay with everyone knowing. Tell me the truth is the lie, because that's what it is to be human, trapped, wrapped, and served. One less for the heat, one more for the books. It's always weird to learn that your friends have been talking shit. It's always weird to learn that your friends are shit. Oh, Homeo, why hast thou forsaken thee? It's true, you can't be as hurt by your enemies as you can by your friends. And sometimes the friend betrayed is the most insidious of one's enemies. The truth misplaced in a void that is constantly screaming back. How could they? How could I? I thought that they loved me back, that community of ours. I forgot that it was a cult that didn't share my values. I forgot that pagan means witch to the ancestors of those who burned us, who stole our culture, who would like to steal it more. There's something I thought they were after, the way they fish for us on the internet, casting out lines that we're all one and the universe is the whole in the center of a vortex in sync with all it consumes. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile, but not everyone will be caught. Not everyone will submit. The question then becomes, what happens to the discarded? What happens to the rejects? Some use it as fuel to project themselves into greatness. Thou shalt always shoot for greatness. These are those who won't be held down. The struggle is real. How's that going for you? Some just can't stomach the rejection. Funny enough, those that reject the honest are the same that can't handle the rejection themselves. The honest assessment of this is that they are outwardly rejecting their rejections because they inwardly reject themselves. It's an inside job and a dirty business. The personification of this shows up as incels and internet bullies, keyboard warriors and Q-tips. Is all malignant narcissism? Or are they just children who think that love is being beaten and whining? It's so sad. This is sad. It may seem cold, but I'm an inferno. I know my limits. I've exceeded them greatly, and their outlines are well defined. So I know when I'm close to blowing the pressure valves. I step back, turn down the heat, stir, always stir, never shake. Learned that the hard way a few times. That's how I know I'm super close. And that if I don't take a seat, I'll explode everything into shit. It's like I keep having to learn the same thing again and again, and I know I must be missing something. One time, I was at this bar in Colorado Springs, a Triple Nickel, and there was this Native American guy out on the patio. We were smoking cigarettes and drinking beers, and he started telling me all this stuff about how to live. He told me how they separate the children according to the hand, each year a finger, and as they grew, they're grouped with the appropriate hand, the hand in raising them. He also told me that trust and respect are the parents of love, and without them, love is an orphaned child. I'm thinking about this today. Am I on the appropriate hand? Am I in the appropriate place? Is this lack of respect what's disintegrating the trust that would rear and support the love? Am I the orphan child? Why do I chase after the thing that hurts me most? Why do I insist on rejection? Why do I prefer to be alone? All this relationship shit is like really screwy. Friendships, business associates, competitors, mentors, lovers, parents, children, the self. What the actual fuck? It's all for naught if you'd prefer to read about galaxies and the slipping of plates beneath someone else's feet somewhere other than here. That one's going to clap back for sure eventually. And we'll all just watch in awe and terror. And after that, people and their bullshit is ridiculously boring. Playing their weird games and fucking with each other, lying to get a head on a plate so they can serve it to the most bitter? No thanks. Pessimistic, I know, but let's get real. In this day and age, a lot of people aren't as interested in growing the common interest as they are interested in themselves, as if humans were any ever different. But where the bards and minstrels once delivered the memory through song and clever lyric, tracing the countryside one ale-soaked tavern at a time, these times have catastrophically changed at a speed that's putting our light out. All the great ideas are flashing behind us as we stare into screens and imagine ways to fuck with each other. You want peace, right? You just want a quiet place where you can be you and do you because YOLO, am I right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I am a bit jaded. And I know it sounds like I've completely given up hope for humanity. And maybe in some ways I have. But in other, far more extraordinary ways, I have new, better, different hopes that could only have been imagined in the soup du jour of darkness. Shh. It's important to be quiet. Sit with it. Deep breaths. We'll start with the respect part. It has to start with respect. Respect is the foundation of it all, the grounding that brings the trust in, the shelter for it. If trust is planted in respect, an abundance of true love grows. So the natural instinct would be to search this respect out so we can have a place to plant our trust. And it's counterintuitive to do that because we're looking to plant one part of something and grow something else. And it doesn't work that way. It's much simpler and much more difficult than that. Backtrack, and the growth sought outside us is the garden that starts in your own yard. The hardest ground to break is the foundation of the self, especially if trust has been broken before, especially if it's been hammered and compacted down by multiple blows. This ground requires the most cultivation and should be handled with the utmost respect as it's refortified and aerated. Only then will it regain its viability. Only then will it be alive enough to sustain. Only then will trust approach it with its life. Trust is a finicky seed, easily splintered if too rigid, effortlessly tossed by careless winds, must be handled with care. Again, the assumption that trust broken is an amendable regrowth that just needs time, when in fact, no amount of amending will ever re-sturdy a broken trust seed. It will always have some deformity to remember its breaking by. These malfigured growths are parasitic on all new seeds, malignant, dying. There has to be a total clearing for new, healthy trust to grow. And you'd think it'd be the heart of the thing that should be healed. So many misperceptions, flooded, rotting. It's the ego that has to be healed for the heart to be soothed. Don't look at me like that. Put your best face away. Egos are fine, even if I just bruised your perception of mine and maybe your own. The degree of the offense is directly proportional to the fragility of the individual ego. How's yours doing? Mine's a little out of whack. I got a few things to sort out. Feeling a little shut in, shut down. Jesus, why not just shut up? The lies dig in at the respect and expose the lack of trust within. Will I ever trust me again? Am I capable? If I get tricked again, is it because I lost my self-respect? For Christ's sake, this is getting complicated. How will I ever love myself with all this going on? Is this happening to everybody? Do any of us trust us? Are we all broken? Or is this gestation? Who's watching? In here, we're all such children. Will our self-love ever achieve optimal parentage? I think it has come down to the bedrock of disrespect. It's what we've learned. It's what everything is based on now. We expect it. Oh, so sad. Should we go back to the shut-in and the guy? Should we re-examine the elements of lying, betrayal, deceit, and cost? The panopticon with no supervision. Latchkey society. Where have all the grown-ups gone? Who's responsible? Tattletales and liars. Who do we go to for surety? Second-person narrative is appealing. We get to become the story. It is our character that stands the tests and triumphs at the end. It is our character that falls into humility, and grace is ours in forgiveness. It takes far less effort to gain the wisdom of pages than it does to gain the wisdom of true experience. We pay little for books and dividends to life's lessons. When we forgo the reading, we forgo foresight. Reading cards helps us create a secondhand narrative where we can participate in our own situations via a hypothetical. Because the view is from an outside inside perspective, we as the main character are able to see and navigate. We can then judge the situation as a story and assess ourselves as the character. We can equip ourselves with a forethought of the possible situation. We have gained self-knowledge through examination of our role in the situation. I often turn to them to reflect, refract, prescribe, adjust. They are a lens to see through. The stasis, direction, or void, of course, are always yet to be determined, but there are other means to reflection, other senses to activate memory and thought. Sometimes I talk on the phone to my friend to remind me that even though we're crazy, we're far from insane. The mutual experiences shared are threads that we hold on to for each other to keep us from floating off. She tells me about the plays of the powerful and how the unity of the people was enough to beat back the ball, a shared goal, a pain of hunger and need, not wanting, but real. The virtue of compassion that is often exploited in that game was the winning stroke that genius of today still mentions fondly. The forget-me-nots lest ye repeats. The day I met her, we were both skeptics, brought to a conference where the philosophies of science were being questioned by an officer of the law who said he was just visiting. We also met a movie star and a geometer who had both placed themselves in the center of the universe. I was offered a seat with them at the dinner, but chose her company instead. I was afraid someone might take my picture at that table, with them, there. I gauged that for myself, something unwanted. They were all nice enough, but something was amiss, and I figured better safely off site than, sorry for what I said, ma'am. So I moved. The guy's a bigwig now. He keeps telling people there's power in the spaces between life, but that sounds like dirty money to me. Every time I hear him talk, I'm grateful I moved seats that day. But what is this that they're selling? What's their big idea? Oh, they've got a lot of them, and they want you to accept them with immediacy. Why should we? Is this a fast one? Is it a string? Who's pulling for what? It's the blink of an eye and a slip of the wrist. They say it's electric, but are they just trying to shock you? Like magic? I do think there's some validity to the idea of electric current shaping our landscape, but I'm unsure if these processes are immediate. Some, of course, are, but at a larger scale, wouldn't the electrification of the entire planet enough charge to create the Grand Canyon and fossilize instantaneously? Wouldn't a charge of that magnitude sterilize the parts of the world that were electrocuted? Would harboring in the ground really keep life safe? If the charge is discharging into the ground, wouldn't that make the surface and the underlying layers subject to a destructive force of power? If the ground is splitting and things are being separated and smashed, transmuted and melted, how is it possible that anything survived, let alone someone? I can see the migrations of the people repopulating an area a few generations after the destructive event, but it's hard to imagine people returning to any place after such great upheaval. It seems more likely the peoples, if this is the scenario, would have moved on to more suitable environments to reestablish themselves. My questions are many. I also have questions about the solar cycle in relation to the shifting poles of the Earth. If the number of ionic particles from the solar wind impact exceed the amount of charge absorbable by our ionosphere and magnetosphere, could the influx of charge cause a change of polarization to our magnetosphere? Does the solar wind drive our poles? Does it make them shift? Does the amount of incoming ionic particulate gently push our magnetosphere over time, forcing it to shift gradually like a rolling wave would eventually beach a floating object? Or sending the object further out into sea? Could there be large events that moved things in faster order? Are there 4 fixed poles and the shifts are 90 degrees instead of 180? Would that better explain the patterns we see over time? Does the amount of space dust in our immediate environment determine the quality, quantity, frequency, species of incoming cosmic radiation? Is there a refractive index that has been standard for our place in space at a particular time, like long-term cycles, that is altered by the migration of our placement to a less dusty region? Do we have to recalculate for a new refractive indices to recalibrate to a clearer space environment? And how does the polishing of this lens, per se, affect our parallax measurements for deep space objects? You can get crucified in a place like that for asking questions like these. The place was not for lack of controversy or haters. The whole situation was a little sus. It is so much more fun to believe it was what we desired it to be. It was so much more interesting when we get to follow a lead to the validation of our own conclusions. It might be an attribute to the lack of popularity for this work being done. It's geared toward a practical application, and to many people, that's boring. It must be remembered that whatever analysis is being examined, it is a fictional story that I am participating in until the time and point where the story is proven to be present in the reality of the communal material. It is best to keep an eye on my feet to make sure they're still touching the ground. It's easy and exciting to get carried away. Who wants practical application when our dreams are so impractical? We hear a lot of stories about what happened in a far-off past. There's so much conjecture. We weren't there. How do we really know? I don't know if there's aliens. I'm pretty sure there were giants. I do not know if there were angels or demons, or if the sights recorded were celestials in motion. I do not know if they knew what I see when I look at their drawings. I do know that it's interesting and fun to wonder and wander through it. So I do. When I was younger, I would walk into a room full of people and say, "Oh my God, what is that elephant all about? Do you guys see it?" And everyone would look at me sideways, shuffle me out of the room, and then not invite me back. And I couldn't understand it. There's obviously a gigantic elephant sitting right there, and I was the only one who asked, and then forced to leave. So when I got a little older, I would walk into a room full of people and I would see the elephant, and I would nudge a friend and I would whisper in a voice and say, "Are you talking about that elephant, or are we pretending?" And of course the answer was, "Shut up, dude, we are not talking about the elephant." And I would shut up, but it wouldn't make any sense to me. No one would ever look at it, but it was sitting right there. I couldn't pay attention to anything else. Then finally, it occurred to me, that poor elephant. All these years at the parties, sitting all alone, ignored, sad. So I went to the party with 2 cups of coffee and I walked past every person in the room. I wouldn't even look at them. I pretended they weren't even there. And I sat down next to that elephant and handed it coffee. And it turns out, elephants love parties. We both love coffee, and they don't have very many friends either. We've been great friends ever since. Of course, now it's just me and the elephant. And even though we're both completely obvious and present, ignored and dismissed, visible, not invisible, we're sitting in the truths of our existence in a room full of people. The best part about being friends with an elephant is that it never, ever forgets. It is the truth. It is real, and I can trust it. There's an infinite comfort in that, and I will forever be as grateful for the company and coffee as I am to sit and share with it. So we have to change our minds a lot. At least, maybe we should. At least when presented with proofs of a true new to us. But then, what are we doing? Does every true statement have to have a proof? Is this query undecidable? Pretend this. The proposition looks wonderful at first, but then the questions, why and for how long? Upon further investigation through conversation, it was revealed on several occasions that the hesitance to put others in the same position was because of their impermanence of the position itself. Right? So why propose to me an impermanent position? And further, why is my long-term future instability worth less than that of others whom it was a consideration for? Then, upon my hesitance to accept such terms, the offer was increased to a greater hypothetical that looked even better than the first, with even greater pitfalls in the long term. So it was actually an even worse offer, now valuing my long-term stability even less and simultaneously insulting my intelligence. Through the same short conversation, I was also asked to reflect deeper into a situation I'm trying to get out of and the similarities to the proposed position. This new thing was a bigger, stronger version of the old thing, and under such defined parameters would surely bring even greater loss of mobility and entrapment, with even greater risk for the long term. What the fuck? Now, I'm of the mind to look elsewhere and leave the whole of the all in every sense and move into a future with different questions. Seems like everyone else is a little wiser, a little less bothered. I should expect this from them because I already know better. Trigonometry is the branch of mathematics that deals with triangles. More specifically, the relation of the sides and angles and the relative functions of any of the angles. Last night, I visited with some friends to discuss the amazingness of weird things. Super lucky for us, the people opening their home to us that evening are teachers, English and geometry teachers to be more precise. A few of us have an ongoing discussion about sacred geometry, history, and temples. A few other fellow diners who were thrown into the middle of our shenanigans were visibly confused by this. So we had to bring it to a communal point where everyone could be involved in the conversation. We decided triangles were the second most relevant shape in the evening's chit-chattering. I have been working on circle theorem and trigonometry. Another friend has been working with stellations. Trig is the necessary component to all of this. I asked our hostess if she would mind giving us an impromptu lesson on the basics of this field of math. She did so graciously. On the patio, over the carefully arranged finger foods spread out atop the wicker ottoman, we all hunched around her as she sketched the explanation on a rectangle of paper she had retrieved from her printer tray. We nibbled on stuffed grape leaves and carrots dipped in hummus as she drew a right triangle and named its sides. Then we buzzed on a bit about the Greek alphabet and why each of the letter assignments was perfect for its placement. We talked about the stability and fluidity of each side and how the angles talked about circles, which translate into waves, and how the drawing of triangles and circles describes the entirety of the universe. After dinner, we broadened our scope and revealed to each other a bit of the sides we took on the differing things, giving to the group our angles on the relative functions of the topics. We were not triangulated in view, even though we were all a bit tangential to the 90-degree heat of the humid August air. It occurs to me that when a written equation is present, some of the information centers begin to close in some individuals. Turns out, it's a real scientifically documented phenomenon called maths anxiety. I would count myself among them. When the problem is presented as a series of line drawings or animations, the information is received visually and processed as such. When presented as a verbal problem, in terms of words describing the drawing or animation as a line drawing, the conversation opens to a population of brain sensors that might otherwise be excluded from the conversation. After describing the drawing and after discussing the terms, we are now more open to the equation. We are now more understanding to the description of the formula. What if all this up is down, and down is around the corner at a bar somewhere, washing its surface clean, adjacent to the light, perpendicular to the plane, induce the charge, seduce the field. We are all plane. We are all irregular mediums. We are the existential crisis the void can't scream into. That's the why. The X is a factor of nonlinear motion. Organic encounters of force. Don't force it. To rise and fall is the character of the wave. To spin and motion as we bob and weave is the path that blankets. It's the crash that shores up the densities that separate. In and down, round and about, keeping on the up and up. We are the wave. We are its character. I realize the simplest explanation is usually the truest. The forms of ancient symbols are no different. The difficulty in description is the simplicity. I spent years hanging out with scientists and geometers, mathematicians and historians, Googlers and cronies, the most complicated of human minds, all arguing and beating their egoic stances in the heads of the unconquerable feet. There is no winning. So why the science for sport? Why that academic aggression? The artist is often dismissed. The philosopher, patronized. This is the way of logical adaptation to learning. Something must be the best. That something is the answer. The question is ever changing, so negates the very basis for the game. The charade parade. Look at us. We're decoding the magic. And then the fight. I do not see the equation underlying the form of the structure. My eyes cannot follow the lines. The shades of gradation have been washed out, and the only thing left capable of reading them are hands, fingers, skin, a tactile response to the changing curvature of the plane. This is where artists shine. This is where philosophers ponder. And this is where reasonable logic isn't capable to fathom. It isn't a numbers game. It's an overhead view of the points and the distances between them. Each surface has a tooth, a texture, a feel. Teeth aren't just for biting and smiling. I look at the ground move and I feel it in my teeth. I know when you're lying. I feel it in my teeth. I know when the truth exits my mouth because I can feel it in my teeth. The roughness or smoothness of paper is measured by tooth. The gradation of the shades cannot be hidden in the rough patches. They accentuate the texture. The hollows of clay are the cause for bursting in a kiln. The bubbles that make glass are liquid air trapped in a slowly sinking solid. All of the sounds interact with the mediums they encounter. All of the mediums respond to the sounds. Some sing, some hold it. Some know that it's their cue to dance. So far ahead, a piece of the singularity. The simplification comes from examining the complex. Zoom out, get way high on top of it. Go ahead, look down on it. Tip your nose to the thing that despises you. Walk through the vacant property of shambled matter and decide what doesn't. What is a circle? It's a picture of a shape. Just picture it. This is what happens. Just look at what words can do. A few misplaced syllables, the accent on the wrong mark, the conjugation of the verb in just such a way that it's interpretable, makes sense, and readable without doing double checking. This simple, nuanced influence drives deeper mechanisms than long, drawn-out sentences and explanations. These little bits of tricks spell us toward their wanting, and we have little control to stop them. Words are funny things, both funny ha-ha and funny strange. They can form our thoughts and express our feelings. They can transcend time and space to deliver messages of records, of actions, of changes, of people. Words can be spoken or written. They can be sounds or shapes. They can be private or spread through the masses. They are our language, our stories, ourselves. What does it say when we're all speaking in a hooked phrase on an image? What does this meme? The memery, the questions of significance, what these pictures tell us. What do they sell? I'm surprised at the newness of the concept to people who claim to be read. Pictorial storytelling is common throughout history. It's on the walls of caves. The conversation was of the great Tartarian Empire, a civilization lost to a flood of mud, a place well documented yet denied. Or is it? What happens when what we're told doesn't match what we have pictured? We drift over the purpose for Bible stories and stained glass windows of Gothic churches, the dark ages of Europe. Europe, the Roman Catholic stronghold of civilized us. The idea or thought or what if the whole world was involved in trade and travel? What if everyone knew it except the Europeans who were in the throes of dark ignorance by a crown that called itself God's liege? Only scribes or priests or men of the cloth were privy to text. The rest would have to settle for the majesty of glass. The rest would have to be told what the words said. The rest would think nothing else exists outside the empire of darkness. Until some people started asking questions, until some learned to read, until some power needed more because words would be the cause of losing. So, who better for the job than a pirate? Who better to sell an idea that was already stolen? Who is fool enough to trade their glass for gold? Where did all this mud come from? It seems everything living breathes, expands and contracts. Thoughts are alive when they are allowed to breathe. It is normal for power to expand and contract. Humans have 5 physical senses, but 80% of the information comes via the eyes. Our vision is the entry to our minds. Control your vision, control your mind. If words are thoughts that can be seen, but the mind cannot read them, the eyes are shielded from the ideas therein. Their eyes can't hear the words. We can't listen to the text. These pictures, these images, this memory of the masses is not new. It's not clever, although sometimes they are witty. They're pictures informed by the context of our mindset. They may not look the same to me as they do to you. Without a text to read, much of the context is a con. A picture is worth 1,000 words. The words are used to form a vocabulary. Limit the vocabulary. Limit the power of the image. Increase the power of the image by depleting the powers of the words. 1,000 evidences set before you. 1,000 evidences denied. Because they don't fit in the picture, because they don't suit the vocabulary, because they don't con the text to those who can read between the lines. The images are an interpretation of a story that's already been told, but that's not what was written. And how do we know what was written is what happened? The evidence is contrary to the picture. Put down the glass. There is no gold. You are the increase of your own vocabulary. The evidence is written all over us. There are gigantic structures all over the planet, similar symbols carved in rocks everywhere. There are Egyptian artifacts in the Americas. There are trinkets from the far east of Asia in Scandinavia. But they only look at the mitochondrial DNA. They only look for the mothers. There's a huge push right now to get our genes tested. Ancestry influences something. What is it? What are we looking for? Who are they looking for? Why does it matter? I can't wrap my brain around the sense of continued hiding. This uprising is necessary and called for. The polarity has been offset by the spin. There is a new environment, and the charge must be grounded to regain equilibrium. Discharge. A great blast. I'm not surprised by the foolishness of humanity. I'm not surprised by the reactions of the actions. I'm not surprised by any of it. It's to be expected. What else could correspond to the rhythm of this dance? It is the stumble. All things that get too great break down into lesser things. It is the nature of it. Whether it be an individual or a civilization, everything is subject to its parts. People break down when their need for power exceeds their capacity of charge. Civilizations break down when their power is dispersed among the masses. The great Roman Empire could not keep Europeans from seeing the light. Dawn was quickly approaching. In this case, the best way to keep control was to convince the people that the empire was responsible for that dawn. The empire brought the sun to the people. They didn't need to learn to read. They need only to be told a new story with new pictures. The trick is keeping the same bards, the same tune, the same song. There had to be an evolution. The pictures were not the same. People were learning to read. The con of the text needed to be updated. None of this changed what was buried in the ground. None of this could lift the scars carved onto the rocks. No picture or words could lift the history from the stones. It's easier to believe we're infallible. It's easier to believe that it's all a lie. It's easier to believe whatever feeds the hunger within us, the sad children that we really are. All this talk about Jesus and the Piscean Age, Moses and the Israelites and the sheep, and about how some great leader of our time would become the avatar for the coming of the age of Aquarius. They wait for it. They breathe it in night and day. The sword of a single God. The ancient text that was mistranslated through the wrong contexts of words over and over and over. And it pains me. It pains the soul in each turn of my DNA. It is the mindfuck poison that so many believe. It is the destroyer. Believers of it participate in the destruction and praise its glory. So stupid to believe that they could have any control. So naive to think that they have any part in anything outside of the collective demise of such tragic and holistic pursuits. Who are any of us to think we matter to that extent? Who are we to believe that humans have any bearing on the intricate mechanics of space? We are a speck on a molecule in a system that equates to nothing more than dust. Nothing matters outside our external cell that is the bubble of human. We can pick up on energy currents. We can communicate telepathically. We can disconnect from the web that is the picture of fear. We can see the words and hear them in our minds. We know better. We fucking know better. We can do better. I could probably write this whole story about my old dog. He was my old man. He was 16 when he died. 4 years older than the average life expectancy of the breed. But of course he was. He was Max. He was 110%, 1,000% of the time. Volume knob to 11. Cuidado. Maximum rock and roll. Maximus the handsomest. Sebastian Maxoisius von Puppenstein. Mr. Velveteers. And sometimes, Maxipad when he was being erotic. Hey, I know how it sounds, but no worries. It was an inside joke between us, and I'm the one who should have been offended. But I could never be mad at his baby seal eyes or his gentle stomping when he knew I was withholding pizza. How could I ever be mad at my spirit animal, my best friend, my love, and my protector? I said this wasn't going to be about my dog, but everything brings me back to Max. Or better, Max brought me back from everything. He was 2 days old in a tent of yelping puppies in the backyard of a semi-transient named Sinner that we had met at the food co-op behind our apartment. Sinner grew up in Ukiah, and he had been staying with his mom at her house a couple blocks away. We got to talking, and he invited us over for dinner. Sinner and a few of the other people staying at his mom's house were rainbow kids who were brought back up into the hills for the beginning of harvest season. They ran a kitchen at the rainbow gatherings called Shut Up and Eat. They specialized in dumpster dining, prepared in 5-gallon Home Depot buckets, and cooked over whatever they could burn. The house was disgusting. Boxes and goods stacked high in hordes pushed the walls in closer and closer until the smell it trapped itself in your clothes. When offered a plate, I told them I had just eaten, and the ambiance was demanding that I vomit. I decided to just wait outside. There was a 2-person camping tent set in the back of the yard against an old redwood fence with bits of baked grass sticking through the tattered holes that made its bottom. A blue tarp, with tatters to match, was hung from the fence and a nearby tree in an effort to create a shade barrier from the 98-degree heat. I couldn't figure out why they hadn't just popped the tent up under the tree in the natural shade. It was well over 115 degrees inside the tent where a dozen puppies yelped helplessly for their weary mother, who obligingly went in to feed them but could never stand to stay too long. Those poor puppies. I couldn't stand to stay longer either. Shortly after, Sinner's grandparents were found drenched and freezing in an outhouse by a guy passing by on a highway who had noticed a vehicle that was submerged at the boat launch. When the guy went down to check on the car, both Grandma and Grandpa were found shivering inside the park's outhouse. They were deemed unfit to care for themselves. Grandpa was sent to a home. I never met him. Grandma was sent back to her house in the care of Center and his mom, who moved themselves and the 13 dogs to Redwood Valley to be with her. That house was even worse than Center's mom's house. Piles of trash inside and out, a fallen swimming pool that had been collecting water in its alginated liner for decades, a giant satellite dish, and a chicken wire enclosure filled to the brim with discarded paper items. 3 greenhouses and a half-dozen cars that had been long since reclaimed by the yard, and a luxury RV that had been shuttered since before the fall of home. This was where Center set up shop. Mom and Grandma would have to stay in the house. By the time we came down off the hill and went to visit them there, the puppies were 3 weeks old. Most of them were roly-poly fuzzballs, probably so well-rounded from worms. They were half lab, half rot, and were huge. There were 2 smaller puppies with different fur. Short, soft, sleek. They were much faster, too. A gray one and a black one. Center said 2 dogs had gotten to Mold. That's Max's mom's name. Mold. One was a big Rottweiler mix, and the other was a full-bred blue heeler, and he was easy to tell the difference between the puppies. The little black heeler puppy was much smarter than his siblings. He avoided fights with the other puppies. He also avoided the massive piles of dog shit that littered the sunburnt grass. He'd walk around it, which the other puppies did not do. He was the only one not completely covered in shit. One looked at him and said, "Yep, that's the one." Took him home, gave him a bath, and never took him back to Center's house. He was so tiny. We had to make special food squishy and paper train him in the apartment. He took to it right away. My son was 4 at the time and obsessed with the cartoon Max and Ruby, and he insisted that we call the puppy Max. And so it was, and so it shall forever be, Maximus the handsomest, the free who shall not be tamed. I fucking love my dog. He was there for all of it. Not only my protector and guardian and friend, but ours. It's not really about the dog. It's about protection. It's about feeling safe. It's about that one being that can be counted on no matter what. And as he laid on the floor, decrepit and hobbled close to the end, I mourned my not yet gone friend and wondered if I'd ever feel that way again, as safe and loved as I did by Max. NorCal was unlike anything I'd experienced. It was like constant camping. Even if you happened to find yourself in an actual building, it probably wasn't finished. The neighborhoods in Ukiah were normal enough. Standard 1970s suburban anchored in a gold rush arts and crafts. Mendocino County had sold off their forests and turned to agriculture during the Great Depression. You'd be hard-pressed to find an old-growth redwood on any hillside in the county, but just north, Humboldt was full of them. When we had first been invited to stay at this retired postal worker's farm, the young granddaughter and her pug Otis gave me a tour of their acreage and took me back along their property line to introduce me to their family redwood. She said Otis gave her permission to introduce me to the fairies that occupied the moss at its base, and I was honored and humbled by the experience. And I think of it often, blessed with a wonder. There were 6 buildings on the property. We were to live in the house at the bottom of the hill, and the postal worker would live at the house at the top of the hill, which his daughter and son-in-law had recently vacated to build their new yurt elsewhere. Neither house nor yurt were finished. The bottom house was the family dwelling since the late 70s, a 2-story redwood cantilever and peg. Most of the interior walls had been framed, but no sheetrock was ever installed. All the electricity was generated from solar panels in the field and a dozen old batteries that sat just inside the door. We could only run 2 lamps and a radio if we wanted to keep the fridge on. We charged anything that we needed charging in the car or on the bus. We'll get to the bus. There was cold water plumbing straight from the spring to the house, but no hot water. For that, we'd have to go 100 feet uphill to the dilapidated pull behind trailer with the wooden deck. The camper was rotting where it stood, right next to a small outbuilding just up from the outhouse, our only bathroom. The camper was really a shelter for the one remaining device within it that still functioned, a hot water heater. The wooden deck was attached to the backside of the camper facing the woods. There was a curtain on one side strung from a clothesline that went from the camper to a tree in order to block the view from the road as one would bathe in the only available resource for such things, a 7-foot antique claw bathtub. It was easy and extremely pleasant once I got the hang of it. 2 hoses, one for the hot water tank and one from the ice cold spring. 20 minutes before bath time, I'd go up to the camper and light the propane on the tank. When the water was hot, I'd empty the tank into the tub and regulate the temp with the water from the spring. Voila! Outdoor forest bath. It was the best thing about the whole situation. This was all well before Max. This was the season before he was born, before we got the studio apartment, before the twins. This was the place we'd wound up instead of going to Olympia, Washington. When we left Colorado, half of our stuff was packed in my trailer. The other half was put on a school bus, not to be confused with the bus, which I promise we'll get to, with this guy named Damon, who was taking it to Olympia, to an anarchist collective full of people who were students at Evergreen. I thought we were moving there so I could go to Evergreen too, but we were intercepted by some vets who tempted us into accepting their pot prospects. We got offered a half-built house and a seasonal work if we stayed in NorCal. It was too strange an offer to pass up. This was regular work for me. I got my first job in a greenhouse when I was 15. We mostly grew geraniums, but we also did posy packs of impatiens and poinsettias seasonally. I was hooked. I moved on to a family-owned garden center and then got trained by some pretty bougie florists in the art of floral design. It was my trade and career. I was a guerrilla grower's wet dream. Not many people who came to the hills had the kind of on-the-job experience that I did. I quickly became a hot commodity. My friend Rocky used to call me the $1,000,000 baby. Interesting analogy in retrospect. This is where it gets squirrely. This is where I veered. This is where I had an opportunity to go in a different direction, but I didn't. I took a hard straight and drove right into whatever this is now. Hindsight, I guess. I had gotten in some trouble the winter before on my way back to Michigan. I was driving alone from Colorado to Detroit when I got pulled over for having dreadlocks in Kansas. They did an illegal search and seizure, all semantics really at this point, but at the time I was terrified. Spent 3 days in Podunk County Jail, smack dab in the middle of BFE. After helping a gomerish pile of a deputy fill out my paperwork, I was led to a cell where I remained for 3 days. The only person in county jail that weekend was me. The cops said they found a pound of pot butter in my car, but I couldn't be sure since I'm not totally sure what it was they found. But since they didn't read me my rights before cuffing me and putting me in the front seat of the cruiser, nor did they had any provocation for searching me, in an amazing twist of fate, a wonderful miracle of a person came to my aid, and a few months later was able to squash the alleged evidence, and I was freed from charges and worry. Calvin Williams, a normal lawyer out of Hays, Kansas, had been at a normal convention at Hunter S. Thompson's house in Stony Creek, Colorado, just before I had gotten arrested. He said he was watching Tommy Chong play a guitar from the tailgate of an old truck and had the call to help someone. He decided that someone would be me. All he wanted in return was a poem. And from then on, I felt I owed the pot gods my life. Callie specifically. I hope I'm living up to their expectations. I hope I'm fulfilling my purpose. I hope I'm honoring their gifts. I'll be the first to admit I need to adapt, need to humbly accept I have no control over the universe or others, only charge. I need to take charge, be in charge, lead the charge of myself. Will I be a positive or negative leader? How far can I emanate my glow?
What kind of star are you? What type of system rules? Can you picture being truly in control of yourself? Can you let go long enough to see the lengths of the reins? From what history has taught us, does it do us any good to hold on? Would any amount of evidence ever be adequate? Would it help making a meme? Would posting it get our message across? How would it be read? Me, meme, me, memory. How will it be remembered? Will it be muddied, buried, carved in stone? It's the stories we tell, the things we say, and how we hear them are filters through which we see. Have you written any stories? Can you see more truthfully through fiction? Can I share my fake stories with you? Do they reveal a picturesque clarity of my inner self? Or am I just enjoying the daydream? Do the falsities of make-believe soften the blow? What if they're actually all real and I'm just saying this to fake you out right now? I wonder. When I don't know what to say, I make pictures. So many people saying so many things. Often, no one is listening. When we're feeling trapped, when we want to combust, explode, escape, we feel our powerlessness. I know this feeling well. I can't think of science or speak of shapes when people have guns drawn. I can't sleep at night with threats looming over the morning. I can't say anything except, this is how it feels. This is how it feels to be caged, scattered, confined, a bit doomed. When I say I won't do this anymore, it's because the above feelings have tied me to this for so long. It felt like some kind of freedom. It felt like flying around in a room, limited before the sky. I can't stay where the limit is beneath me. Neither should you. It's inappropriate to allow that of myself. You can do what you want, but you should know you're better than that too. I can only teach myself to have some class, remind myself how sacred we are. You are, I am, and free myself accordingly. To rise above it and see it, there must be some looking down. That's just being realistic. I've been making pictures of what it looks like to be free. She was pretty sure the birds tweeting weren't government agents, but she couldn't be sure. All the times they sat on the branches of the peach tree, and she'd watched them in amazement as the very slightness of their weight dared to topple the whole thing over. A tender timber, a voice and a song. It was really a string they were after, a long piece of cotton twine that had been divided into many strings of itself that were now offering themselves to the nests. She'd seen the articles about using colored fibers so they could be tracked throughout the neighborhood. She didn't want them to be self-conscious. She didn't want to attract unwanted attention to their children. The string in the peach tree was unbleached, tawny with tannins from the rain earlier in the morning. They couldn't be spies. They talked too much. The sun rises over the river to the east, and if viewed from the traffic light, a small island that used to be a lighthouse becomes the fog, and the whole river disappears in the midst. It's a sight that only lasts about 5 minutes on mornings when the air holds a bit of the water hostage. Some mornings, the air doesn't even bother. Some mornings, neither does the river. They leave everything to the sun, and the crumbling tower of lighthouse becomes a shadow of its former self. Those are the days for the birds, for the fishermen in small craft with their outboard motors that wake the stillness and remind the fish to eat. While she'd learned to trust the heron, that grouse is still suspicious. She couldn't believe the turkeys would ever allow it, but whatever. Night had again become day, and the dawn was more dusk as children finally went to sleep. One by one, the windows out her windows darkened as if they were turning to follow the earth. But she couldn't sleep with that sparrow howling. She couldn't turn in her light. She wanted to wait for the purple clouds to form the shapes of fogless air over the river in case something interesting might happen. She couldn't rest until she saw the strings from last year's peaches hanging amongst the upright sticks. a fallen tree that had hung on all season by one rooted cord, pushed over by hand to make room for the hydrangea. A single cut, lopped through by a child, surrendered its life and fruit, its string and peaches. It had been thoroughly bugged. She wondered about the fate of the apple tree. They have always had a fondness for robins, but are they as good of listeners? Things had been quieter since the cat ate the female Oreo, a rare delicacy for her eyes and his palate. She wondered now that the eagles were gone, and the peach and its strings, which birds would watch her at dawn, whose song would sing her to sleep, what cords were attached, and to what destination did the strings align somewhere along the banks of the river. The ultimate in oppositional defiance disorder, the main squeeze of ODD, adamant refusal to believe any of it, to lift a finger, to even participate through breathing, not an utterance of inhalation, not a single wisp exhaled, held in on all sides by force of will. Hell no, we will not grow. We will not go there willing. We will not sigh in vain. We will hold it all in until it seeps out the edges of fate and light and justice and fear. And then we'll deny our explosion in the gratification of the boom. Pure silence, pure near, pure, unadulterated, common, low-key. Shh. The old paper was convinced it was supposed to tear along the folded line. It had been forced back into position so many times the fibers of the creases had nearly disintegrated, and the softness of what was left knew it would have to eventually let go. She had to gently convince it to stay intact. She needn't open it to read it. The letter had traced itself on her mind a little deeper each time she had unfolded it before. With or without the paper, the words were folded into her. It wasn't the words that drew her to it. It was the very paper she held, the familiarity that had developed around the corners and worn down angles. It didn't matter what was on it. After the words spoken, the words written lost their punch. It was all fiction now. She couldn't believe any of it. She couldn't believe any of it anymore. None of it had really ever happened, not in the way that it had before. Not in the way that she realized them in the experience, not the things she thought before having to think about what she knows now. It was all fiction, a story someone else had been writing. She, a character she was yet to meet. She was a page unfolded, a paper to slide right off. All the little bits of herself given in truth were rearranged until she didn't recognize who she was reading. The letter said, "You are a ghost," and it was haunting her. She thought it was a beautiful dream. She thought it was a friend. She thought it was an apparition of faith. But it was a science experiment. It was a study of human sociology. It was a test to see if similar results could be predictably repeated. It was a sham. She wasn't a ghost because this paper had lost its spirit. It had lost its fold. She didn't want to force it to bend, to reveal itself, to show its stains to the light of the day because they didn't mean anything anymore. She knew the results. She could see the data repeated in other subjects who didn't see the characterization of themselves on the little folded pages they were holding. Some screaming and waving their fictitious stories in the air, some repeating their narrative blindly by heart, so deeply traced in them that no longer sought to read. The pages of stories we all wanted to be true, good or bad, for better or worse. She felt comfort in the terror in knowing she wasn't the only one. But poetry is for bards singing the messages that they carry, and we can be anyone in a song. It's the paper that waits. It's the singer that changes the tune. She ran the edges of the paper corners over her fingers like velvet carpets of 1,000 dreams, feeling the braille of its story, letting it slip through her character. When I thought about the old advice given, to be passive, just do what you're told, I wonder how many had suffered because they didn't fight. When I think of the old adage, better on your feet than on my knees, I wonder how many had died in vain with their souls buried deeply beneath them. When I thought about any approach to fighting, the thing that stuck out most was the cause. Of course, the opponent must be considered to be effective, but in order to be fully effective, we must understand the reason for the approach, the cause for the action. Why act at all? Mostly for the thought of, what have we got to lose? Just ourselves. Only everything. Adjust ourselves. Own everything. I have to understand myself, and growing is not wasting time. Although I did build a couple of lives I've hated, had to demolish both of those. It's okay. The first one I held on to tooth and nail, fought for it with my everything, refused to let it go, lost myself in it, carried around the weight of it like a growth beneath my skin. It was hard to get past it because it would flare up every now and again, make its presence re-known. I had to build a life I could hide in from it. I had to shield myself from it. I had to run further and further away. But it always found me and would drag me out by my ankles every fucking time. It took a lot of fighting it off before I realized I could fight it off. It took a lot of what the fuck to unfuck the fear that kept me from unhiding. The fear that he would take them. The fear of the lives they would have. The fear that I wouldn't be able to protect them. The fear that he would hurt me and hide me and lie about it out of spite. Because he had tried before. Because he had tried so many things before. Because I had failed. Because he had failed. Something had failed. Or so I thought. I didn't see the stains of it all over me. I thought it was just my color. I didn't realize that I had learned to not trust anyone nor believe in the goodness of their intentions. I was attracted to people and circumstances that reminded me of prior situations in which I failed to receive my desired outcome, so I would reenact the parts and get mad at the replacement parts when they didn't know their lines. But again and again, the same character. Like those films about reincarnation where the spirit keeps repeating different faces, different names, same eyes, same intentions. It was me who was the problem, trying to gain acceptance in a male-dominated industry because I was too little and girls weren't allowed to play street hockey, trying to be heard in a room full of talkers, hiding under the table to feel the squishy, rubbery pop of the fake grapes and styrofoam apples that were certainly not meant for eating, feeling the upset that people kept wiping their shoes on me, feeling the coolness of the window breeze into the cramped undercarriage of a room that had forgotten I was there, to feel most at home and comfortable when I could hear all of the voices of the people who couldn't see me. I didn't have to be under the table. I could have been in the yard, up in the cherry tree. Because I couldn't play hockey, I got to ride bikes with Megan and Dawn. I didn't need to be afraid to sit at the table or participate in the game. Turns out, I am very uncomfortable there. I would much rather be on my bike. I would much rather be in the cherry tree. I would rather break my life down again than to hide another moment, than to cower beneath a table or allow anyone's threats to retreat me. I need no approval to live. I need no cover to hide. I need not fight to be, to exist, to love and learn and express and shine and make good for myself and my children, and to build a life with a solid foundation built on my terms, protected by my own boundaries. So go ahead and say whatever. Go ahead and eat your crows. The table I sit at is abundant with cherries of my own picking. The company I keep is long-standing and delights in riding bikes and in watching. Right back to respect. Full circle. Full stop. Remember how I said, for a while, I intermittently lived on a hill in Northern California? I lived on many hills. This one was home base. 40 acres of land owned by a retired government worker who'd been building a house in the meadowed plain at the lower reaches of the property. There was a year-round creek that bent in a shallow pool drawing the property line. The house had been under construction since the 1970s. It still wasn't finished, nor were the outbuildings that lurked in the flat spaces trailing up the hill, nor was the house at the top of the hill, which had begun to be built in the 1990s, nor were the greenhouses that were framed in at the highest peak of the small mountain, So it's basically a huge mess of exposed boards aged by the weathered seasons of many, many moons. The materials long ago purchased were heaped up in stacks along the tree lines. They wore coats of rust and moss. The land was building on them instead. That's why the property's owner's assistant insisted on living in the bus. He said he didn't need anything else, just that outhouse and whatever was on the bus. The thing that always got me was how little there was on that bus. It wasn't a bus that had been converted into a living space. It was very simply still a bus. They used it when they would do political activist work. It was kind of famous in the local area. The assistant took a lot of pride in the bus. It seemed good for him. He, the assistant, was an avid tweaker who had at that point done 5 tours in San Quentin. He was happy to live there, and we were happy to keep him out on the bus. I started noticing some weird stuff, though, even for a meth head. They knew things. They'd say things. Something just wasn't right. Now, in this environment, it's common for the social rules to be a little different than the norm. A little bit of heightened paranoia pervades these hills anyway, so to have a tweaker being a little bit extra was not a surprise. What was a surprise was when they would spout out an offhanded response to something that was never said to them. They knew things they just shouldn't have known. Personal things. This raised my eyebrows. I called a meeting. Our small group of travelers met up in town at a park and discussed our experiences. We decided the whole place was bugged. We would do an experiment, plant a seed, and see what might grow. Sure enough, a reaction sprouted. Adjustments were made by those outside the plan to calibrate to the change we effectively set into place by making up some shit and talking about it openly in a room. Those who were not in the room responded and took actions to address the new paradigm, but without our direct expression of it to them. This was evidence enough for us travelers to set out in search of more proof. We found it in the bus. A small, homemade FM receiver. We found 2 makeshift transmitters in the greenhouse and 1 in our bedroom. We found them very quietly, but we found them. They had been listening the whole time. Since I was the only woman, the only one who had never been in the military, the assistant liked me, and all this I guess the group decided was my idea. I was nominated for the task of confronting the landowner and assistant about the issue. I did it without hesitation because I felt like my privacy had been invaded, and I was super naive to the real possibility that these 2 guys could totally disappear me if they wanted. No trace. I had no clue. I was not going to be listened to without my permission. I went straight up that hill and spoke my piece, not realizing, of course, that my so-called cohorts were at the bottom of the hill packing up their belongings for a swift getaway if need be. Way to stick together, guys. Funny thing is, though, even though I was the only one without government training, I was the one that figured it out, made a plan, implemented it, and found the transmitters. Everyone at the bottom of the hill thought I was walking up to the doom of my fate, but to the contrary, the property owner and the assistant were very impressed. They offered me more seasons and recommended me to their friends for side jobs. I got 6 years of employment out of the whole deal, and I had a permanent position to use that clawfoot bathtub whenever I wanted. But I never, ever, ever used it again. So you never know what's going to happen, and you can't let fear stop you. Maybe one day I'll walk up a hill to address some shit I know just ain't right, and I might not come back down, but I'll be doing it with a good conscience and evidence in my hand, and the possibility that it just might work out. My son asked me this morning what it is that gives me that feeling of being a kid on Christmas morning. He was talking about joyous passion. What is it that brings us joyous passion? A few years ago, I'd have said the electric universe. I'd have said new scientific discoveries that back up the ancient wisdom. I'd have said all the people who rally cry for broader thought and greater understanding. I'd have said all kinds of things. This morning, I woke up to social media, 3 comments on topics I would normally expect to feel passionate about. The comments were all mildly cynical, and none were joyous. People can feel and say whatever, however they want. But let me tell you what the collective criticism does to passion and joy. It kills them, strikes them dead. Sometimes it's immediate. Other times it is a slow, silent death that creeps in like an invisible cancer that kills passion in our sleep. We believe this cynicism is passion, so we allow it, embrace it, feed it, grow it, until we are all consumed and can't see past the jaded views we have placed before ourselves, rejecting fully, vehemently, and at times violently against anything that our cynicism passionately opposes. And we call this noble. It's wearing. People are feeling it. We're being robbed of our joy, robbed of our passionate discoveries by our predetermined view of what it's all supposed to look like. And no wonder those who would lead us there are just as treacherous as our own misguided actions. We are angry and sad and depressed and searching for support in the communal lies we tell ourselves that we know more about everything than anyone else, and that the rest of the world is petty fools who will bow to us once they figure out what's really going on. Who the fuck do we think we are? No wonder we're all on the edge of sanity. No wonder we're depressed and lashing out at our loved ones. No wonder no one who is actually looking for the joy of discovery will find it here without being beaten with dogma first. It's so hard to believe it, let alone write about it. All those years feeling paranoid that they were listening, that they were watching, that they were doing so much more than stealing my work. I would have liked to believe that he loved me. I would have loved to believe that he liked me. It was all just a hobby, really, right? I mean, turned into a complete reframing of my context on everything from reality to fiction, to seeing the storylines of movies and Netflix shows and getting anxious, to try to deliver a truly fake news report for an audience of one for a grade at school and being so freaked out by the prospect of being seen, being on camera, being accessible. It made my blood pressure go up high enough to burst a blood vessel in my eye. Traumatic and dramatic are two different things easily confused for each other by strangers. One demands attention, the other keeps from paying for it. So when I tried to speak up on it, I was ridiculed. It's better that way. Now I know who else is capable of traumatizing. Drama averted. See, I already told him it was over. I had already canceled my flight. I kept feeling like there was no future tense if I was there. I felt like I'd never come back. And I knew he wouldn't protect me. Have had suspicions he was in on keeping me. It was creepy. They all thought they were so smart, but they're so pathological it was easy to predict what they'd do next. Not easy to dodge, but at least I could see where they were shooting from and what they were aiming at. I was floored when they all started on about the pandemic being made up. Even as people all around us were dying, they laughed at me for telling them to be kind. They yelled at me for telling them to be considerate. They mocked me when I stood up for my governor, a woman being threatened. A state capitol was a test of a larger ploy. There are always tests for something bigger. If the whatever it is successful, it encourages larger action, bigger results. The U.S. Capitol, the immigrants of the Little Bear and the Eagle pushing against the fences to see where they hold. I've been seeing satellites falling in my dreams for years. It's all about space real estate. Near Earth orbit is the key to seeing the whole, hearing the whole, owning the whole. We're all watching the ground, laughing at the idea of don't look up when that's exactly where we should be looking. This vivisection of populations isn't confined to our continent. It isn't confined to the planet or humanity. It's a vivisection of our future tense, and it's getting tense. Betrayal is the human condition. Trust is the fruit forbidden by the trees, the forest of unseeing. The knowledge of snakes and skins and shedding that slither beneath what grounds us. This is modernity, the breaking of the reptilian self. I think if people dug deeper into their education, they would see that the reptilian agenda is an inside job, meaning that the appeal is directed toward the basest of self, the basal ganglia, the mechanism within our brain organ that controls our automated self-preservation, our innate behavioral patterns. Those oldest and most imperative of functions, breathing, temperature control, heart rate, balance. These things are sublimated thought redirected into thoughts that feel good. It's so much better when we feel good. It's appealing to instinct. Instinct overrides logic. Reason gives way to desire. We're trapped. I urge anyone reading this or listening, get up off the floor of the forebrain and think. The basal ganglia is a part of the limbic system, the part of the brain that is responsible for emotional responses and behavior. Evolutionarily, the structures within the limbic system are the oldest brain parts. They feed us, urge us to care for our young, urge us to produce young, and to fight or flee when faced with danger. Like the means employed by almost every commercial or ad blared in our faces, these aspects appeal to us without our say. They just do, because our brains are built that way. And as much as we postulate our definitions and verbally sway ourselves in efforts to persuade ourselves we're against it, we actually really like it a lot. We fight for it, work for it, build it up, tear anything adverse to it down, and squash all who would speak or action in defiance of it. We ourselves are the greatest perpetrators of it. We support it with our every action, knowingly, unknowingly, forcefully, unwavering. That's the reptilian brain agenda, and is bought and paid for by you and other just humans who like to benefit from the make-a-buck system. Ta-da! You just took a bite of the apple. You may now exit Eden. Thank you for your visit. Lilith will escort you to safety. I've been warned not to say these things. That stargazer, she always run her mouth. Well, somebody's got to do it. You're welcome. And lucky for you, I'm not concerned for my reputation. My imperfect life has led me down past the angelic fear to tread. My incredible mistakes have taught me rare and priceless lessons. My vision has kept me growing. My foresight has kept me alive so that I can tell you these things, so that I could share with you my experiences in the hopes that you too may override your limbic system and see that you are not crazy. You're a human. We're all just human. It's relieving and disappointing, and I don't know for sure if it's true, but when I look at it from this perspective, it makes sense and it's manageable. There is a solution hidden in the problem. I always thought that selling our soul was like this super big deal. I always pictured it like an "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" where a scraggly looking old white dude met up with the seller in an open and conspicuous place to hand off an immortal soul for some extreme prize like impeccable beauty or riches, fame, stellar guitar riffs, etc. But no, it's not usually quite so elaborate. Most times, it's not even fancy. It's pretty mundane, actually. Little bits at a time, divvied out for some small wants that go unnoticed until piled up. All the little compromises of self, all the nuanced self-betrayals. Every time something that good and healthy and forward-moving is traded for something quick, easy, unfulfilling, we are selling bits of our souls. Until we look around us and nothing is left but vacancy. The stuff we sold ourselves with, never satiating our hunger. I hear apples are more nutritious than soot. I was told flight is fancier than fighting. I once heard that if you feed your emotions plastic, they'll develop an affinity for petroleum. People are worth more than this. Does that mean our value of self or our value as wealth and not our own? We sold that part of us already. Would we be willing to trade it all to get our whole selves back? I think about him with all this chaos going on. I think about how they tried to free themselves but were unable, and how I wanted to buy his mom's slippers. And now they're all on the wrong side of this, and all the people here who I thought were revolutionaries are favoring the same wrong side that's trapped him. And I'm so confused. They paid lip service to things they can't feel. They masquerade as helpers, but only help to dislodge and destroy. And I can't help but feel sorry for him and all his inescapable intellectualism, castrated by his own fear. I go back and forth between sympathizing with his plight and feeling utterly disgusted by his lack of courage. Of course, he and the rest of them had their own agenda, as is their right, I guess. It's not within their rights to mess with people's lives, emotions, well-being, safety, basic human shit. I just can't believe that they would all work so hard in an attempt to turn ours and other beautiful free places into their cesspools of oligarchy and cruelty. And then I watch them do it. I hope the sovereignty from their agendas is apparent to any listeners of my former works. While I did and still do agree with many of the scientific ideas within their folds, I do not capitulate to their cultish demands on views, nor do I support the bullying, gentrification, or what other violent tendencies their ways sway them. Disclaimer noted. The first time I went to a conference with these people, I was sexually harassed by the greeter at the door. I told the woman who was running the show, and she acted like he wasn't that kind of guy. I met up with a couple people I'd been talking to on social media about the book I was writing at the time, and we all went in the parking lot to smoke a joint. And when we got out of the earshot of the main group, I asked them where all the black people were. I told them I felt a bit uncomfortable with this lack of diversity, and I was wondering if we could figure out some ways to bring in more people from different cultures. And I was told, black people really aren't that into electricity. I thought I heard him wrong, so I asked again and was told that black people hadn't taken any interest in their community. About a year later, a black guy showed up on the scene and was put front and center. I guess he liked electricity. I continued to ask this question at conferences for the next 2 years. It was especially unwelcome in the UK event, but I was close to the end at that point, and right in the thick of it. Within the first 2 days of the month-long experience, I knew it was over. It took me 3 more months to truly accept it. I pushed the fences to see where they were weak. I hung around until they exposed themselves because we were all ready to be relieved of the discomfort of our opposing values. I wanted it to be real. I wanted to be contributing to something greater than me. And I was, but not the thing that was for the greater good. Maybe writing this will redeem my soul bit traded by my late exit. Maybe I can get back some of the dignity I lost. Maybe I can renew my faith and trust and give in to the idea that he might have had a smidge of true love for me. I pretend we fought to save our lives. We made a show to prove the end. I could not give in. I had it pegged. He'd admit it and then deny it. This is the pathology. Gathering information. Fucking with my head. I should tell you that I am not special. I only saw these things because I've seen them before, many times. Some things I was even able to see in myself, and this helped me heal. We build relationships like the boats that carried us through childhood. This is what the masts must have looked like. This is how to stitch the sails. Our rudders are turned by the wheels on our bows, and we decide how well we navigate the waves of interaction. If I sink, it's because my ships were not worthy of the body upon which they were set. Small boats do better inland. We must prepare for an open sea. I am not adept at sailing. I prefer not to swim. There are multiple aspects of anything we investigate. Rarely is something singular in root or reason. If there is a singularity, it had better be a damn good one. Otherwise, various aspects are generally the attributes that weigh the balance of understanding and acceptance. Here are these people who would argue every little thing, as if that's the most productive use of their time. as if pummeling people over the head with information is an effective learning tool. When things come at us in a forceful manner, it's instinctual to resist. When we're resisted, we push harder. More force meets more resistance. And then the oscillation creates a perpetuation, almost inescapable. It's hard to have conversations in these oscillations. They create whirlpools of rhetoric that sink everything in their wake. Why enter into such treachery? Best to turn our sails and rudders to the calm seas and get on with our learning. The thing is, these ripply, disgruntled wave markers are mobile vortex sinks. They travel around, disturbing the stillness with their eddies. I'd like to pull away, but they follow. Chase gives way to the run. I think people see what they want to see and go toward it. Mirage or reflection, shadow or wind, headlong is the way we go. Ashes wouldn't stop us because we're determined to burn. That's the only way for the phoenix and dragons to be born. We yearn for the destruction because we innately feel it will free us. I spend time mapping measured lines over mirages and abstractions, optical illusions, and shows crystals put on in the sky. They do not reflect the forms explained by those who already have an idea. But I do not fault their effort or trying. I praise the change of mind that breeds evolution. I will not trap myself in ideas of what things are. I will unlock myself through their exposure, the exposure of shapes in multiple aspects. There is only truth. When light and plasma differ because they are of substance, when we can harness ourselves without malice, without destruction, it will still be infinite. But we will be too.